Hey, I'm Paul from BostonChefs.com, and today I'm going to give you a little crash course on Beer 101. Basic ingredients to beer are simple. It's water, malted barley, hops, and yeast. It's predominantly water, but it's the other ingredients that really make each beer style interesting and different. What happens first is the brewer will take the malted barley, which looks like this. It comes in quite a number of different styles that are most evident in terms of the difference in color. You've got your base malt, which is the lightest. You've got caramel malts or crystal malts, which are slightly darker and have a sweeter taste. And then you've got your chocolate and your roasted barley, which are considerably darker and have a slight bitter taste. And the way that you get a different beer style, the difference between, say, Sam Adams Boston Lager and a Sam Adams Bock, is the different proportions of the malt that goes into the beer. Obviously, a darker beer has more of the malted, has more of the roasted grains, and a lighter beer might not have any roasted grains and just has the lighter color grains. So after the brewer will take the malted barley and extract the sugar from it, he'll add hops at various times during the brewing process. By the brewing process, I mean the boil. The malted barley, the sugar's extracted and it's all dissolved into water, then that comes to a boil and the hops get added. Hops get added at different times during the boil to achieve different effects. At the beginning of the boil, you add hops to make the beer bitter. In the middle of the boil, you add hops to give it a flavor, the flavor of hops. The citrusiness, the floralness, the earthiness, tastes like that. The hops you add at the very end of the boil are what creates the aroma of beer. Most of your perception of the hops, I would say, comes in the bitterness at the end and the aroma that comes from the last hop addition. And once that's done, once the beer has been boiled, the hops have been added, the brewer will cool down that boiling hot wort and add yeast to it. Brewers will add a lot more yeast than this, but it comes in a very sort of a milky substance. The yeast just gets added to the sugary liquid at this point and does its thing for a week or so. And what its thing is it turns sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. It also imparts some flavors to the beer. Different yeast strains impart different flavors. After a week or so of fermentation, the brewer takes the beer off of the yeast, which has all fallen to the bottom, puts it in a conditioning tank, maybe to lager a little longer. The word lager means to store, hence the lager style beers. And after that, he'll package it, bottles, kegs, and it'll show up at your bar. There's really two parts of the family tree of beer, two primary parts, lagers and ales. Pretty much everything falls under one of those two categories. The primary difference between them is the yeast that's used. Lager yeasts basically prefer a different temperature than ale yeasts to ferment beer. Lager yeasts ferment at a lower temperature. They ferment around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 to 50. They also are referred to as bottom fermenting yeasts. It means there's not as much action on top. They all stick in the solution when they ferment. Ale yeast, on the other hand, like it a little warmer. Ale yeast ferment anywhere really from 65 to 72 degrees. And they're referred to as top fermenting yeast. So when an ale is fermenting, there's a big foamy mess on top of the beer. One of the most common styles, the most common type of beer drank in America is light beer, or the lighter style of American lager. And people often ask or are curious as to what makes a light beer light. What is added to the beer to make it light? In point of fact, nothing's added to the beer. It's pretty much a watered down version of its bigger brother here. It's just less of all of the ingredients, and that's what makes a light beer light. The three beers we have right here are all lagers, yet their color is substantially different from lightest to darkest. That difference in color is all based on the grain. If you look at your grains right here, you can see that this light American lager primarily had grains of this color. This lager in the middle probably had both the light grains and some of these medium darker grains. And then this beer on the end had a lot more of this roasted or chocolatey barley on the outside. IPAs are a very common style these days, and you just don't see them as IPAs. You see them as double IPAs, triple IPAs, imperial IPAs. Any number of adjectives get added to the beginning. The origin of the IPA, it is related to the standard pale ale, which is sort of its little brother. But the story with the IPA is a beer brewed to a specific strength in alcohol and a intensity of hops, both of which would preserve the beer when it was shipped from England to India, hence India Pale Ale. Since then, brewers in the US have been inspired by the style and thought there's not enough alcohol or hops in it, hence making double and triple and imperial varieties. So the difference between a pale ale, IPA, a double IPA, maybe an imperial or a triple IPA is just the amount of hops and then therefore the amount of malted barley and alcohol that ends up in the beer as well to sort of balance the flavor. Although they're increasing in intensity, they're all balanced in their own way. Brown ale is an interesting style of beer because it is on the darker side, but it's pretty light to drink. It's not heavy like a porter or a stout. So people sometimes ask, where does a brown ale get its color and why isn't it as dark or as rich as a stout? Well, brown ale is actually made primarily of lighter and middle colored grains, little toasted grains, with just a small amount of the chocolatier grains to add its color. By adding just a small amount, the brewer can get the color in the brown ale, but doesn't get those roasted, toasted coffee flavors that you'll get in a bigger beer like a stout or a porter. Porter look very similar to stouts. They're the darkest end of the spectrum of the ale family. Again, the basic ingredients are the same for all the beers. However, this will just be using a lot more of the darker grains. So when it comes right down to it, you need to just read a little more on the bottle or ask your server or look at the beer menu to get a sense as to just what kind of beer you're tasting. You can't assume that all lagers are light or all ales are dark. You can't assume that all lagers are easy drinking and all ales are very complex. There's a great variety in beer, and it's fun to explore.